Hi everybody, welcome back. So for today's SPAG lesson, we are going to be revising main clauses and subordinate clauses. And this is something that I know you guys are amazing at, so I think you'll be able to do this really, really well. Are you ready? We're going to get straight into it today. Let's go. So I have got some sentences here and I have covered up part of my sentences with those pink boxes. I'm going to ask you to think about what is behind the pink boxes. So we've talked about clauses before. We're not talking about Santa Claus. We're talking about clauses in SPAG. So what is a clause? Let's try this first one here. A clause is a part of a sentence. Well done, well remembered. And I can tell if it is a subordinate clause because it doesn't make sense on its own. So subordinate clauses do not make sense on their own, and that is how you can tell, okay? You can usually spot where one clause ends and a new one starts because there will be a comma or a starts with a conjunction. Well done. So I've got an example here. And it says, although it was February, the sun was shining. So the trick with finding the subordinate clause is to ask yourself that question. Does it make sense on its own? And if it helps you, you can get rid of the other half of the sentence. You can cover it up with your hand. So you might want to take my little pink box here. So I'm going to be thinking about the part of the sentence that I have turned red. So this part. And I want to answer the question, is it a subordinate clause? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and read it on its own and see if it still makes sense. I'm going to cover up the other half of the sentence. And if I get rid of the other half of the sentence, forget about it for a minute, it says, the sun was shining. Well, that does make sense on its own. I know there's not a full, a capital letter there, but it does make sense on its own. So it can't be a subordinate clause. And if it's not a subordinate clause, it must be a main clause. So that means that in this sentence, my subordinate clause is, although it was February. Now, when you get higher up the school, you will learn that there are different types of subordinate clauses. But today, we're just going to be answering that question. Is it a subordinate clause or not? Okay? So we are going to do some practice together, some guided practice. Then I'm going to give you some to do on your own. And we are going to be spotting the subordinate clause. So you don't need to write these out in your book. You can write your independent work out in your book, but these ones you just need to listen and see if you can guess, okay? So we're going to read the sentence and we're going to underline the subordinate clause. So we are going to find the bit that does not make sense on its own. And there are some clues to help us. We've got some commas. Okay, so let's do the first one. You are older, although you don't look like it. So we could, let's get something. I'm going to put a shape in here, look. And that way we can use it to cover up different parts of the sentences. Okay, although you don't look like it. That doesn't make sense on its own, does it? So that must be my subordinate clause. So I'm going to underline my subordinate clause. Right, let's try number 2. Let's cover up the beginning of the sentence and ask ourselves that question. Does it make sense on its own? You are an experienced storyteller. That does make sense on its own, actually, doesn't it? So that can't be a subordinate clause. It must be a main clause. Let's try it the other way around. Cover up this part of the sentence. Although you are young. Yeah, that doesn't make sense on its own, does it? So that must be my subordinate clause. So I'm going to underline it. Okay, now let's go to the next one. You look very smart. You look very smart whenever you put your school uniform on. Does that bit make sense on its own? Let's try it on its own. Forget about the other half of the sentence. Whenever you put your school uniform on. No, I need some more information. You're probably sat there going, yes, what's the next bit? No. So that part there is my subordinate clause. So we are asking ourselves that question, does it make sense on its own? Let's try 2 more and then you can have a go on your own. I got on the horse to go riding, although I had forgotten my safety helmet. You must never do that. It's very dangerous. You've always got to wear a helmet. Whew. So let's cover up one half of the sentence and see if the other part still makes sense. Although I had forgotten my helmet. That doesn't make sense on its own, does it? So that part is my subordinate clause. Okay, and the last one. I need a bookshelf because mine is broken. So let's cover up the first half of the sentence because mine is broken. It doesn't make sense on its own, does it? Should we check the other end just to be sure? I need a new bookshelf. Yeah, that does make sense. So that part must be my main clause because it makes sense on its own. And that means, because we're playing spot the subordinate clause, that is my subordinate clause, so I'm going to underline it. So I'm going to show you some sentences now. Here are your sentences, look, and you are going to underline the subordinate clause in each of those sentences. So you're going to write that. You don't need to write out the example. You don't need to write out this one here, but you're going to write the sentences out in your book and really neatly, hopefully with a ruler, use a ruler to underline the subordinate clause. And remember, the subordinate clause is the bit that does not make sense on its own. So pause the video, get going with those questions, and in a moment I'm going to give you the answers. Okay, so are you ready for the answers? Your book should look a little bit something like this. So remember, I asked you to underline the subordinate clauses, and the subordinate clauses are the bits that do not make sense on their own. Okay, so when she was standing next to her brother was number 1. Even though he had little patience, although she had not been playing for long, and which seemed never ending. So those were your subordinate clauses. And with subordinate clauses, they don't have to just go at the beginning. They can go at the end, or they can sometimes even go in the middle. So you can't just assume that they go at the beginning all the time. So well done if you manage to get those. And yeah, I think we're getting really quite good at subordinate clauses now and main clauses. So that is the end of the lesson for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you worked hard. And I hope you have a great day and you carry on making me proud. And I'll see you all soon. Bye.